Hello, good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for your patience as we got our technical issues sorted, but welcome. I'm Chris Jurgens from Omidyar Network. We are a social change venture founded by Pam and Pierre Omidyar, and I work on our Reimagining Capitalism team, where we're working to address the structural challenges of the heart of our economic system and shape a new inclusive economy where markets serve the interests of all people and society. We're a proud supporter of Main Street Alliance, and we're delighted to be co-hosting today's event with them. Let me just say, I've personally been so inspired by Main Street Alliance's work and that of their members over the past year to fight for small businesses in the face of unprecedented challenges, to advocate for critical COVID response policies, and to center the voices of those small businesses and communities that have been most impacted by today's crises, particularly in communities of color. We're here today to talk about government's role in rebuilding a resilient Main Street economy. The economic crisis set off by COVID has forced us all to re-examine the ways in which unfettered markets have led to prosperity for some, while also increasing harmful inequities across racial, economic, and geographic lines. This is a symptom of deeper structural issues within our economy and democracy. Our current form of capitalism is fundamentally broken, and we need an economy that is more democratic, an economy in which everyone, including small businesses, entrepreneurs, and workers, can have equal voice, hold power, and get ahead. We believe this means our government has an essential role to play in shaping and supporting markets to ensure they deliver the outcomes we want as a society and democracy. Because the truth is, markets are not naturally occurring phenomena, as economics class might have taught us. Rather, markets are built, and we build them. They're shaped by ideas, values, culture, politics, law, and of course, power and people. And despite long-standing narratives to the contrary, business is not uniformly opposed to government's role in the economy. This is a myth we have to dispel. Small businesses are essential to our economy and integral to the fabric of our local communities. They're as diverse and vibrant as our country is, and they have needs with respect to public policy that are different from the giant corporations and lobbyists that often claim to represent them in Washington and state capitals across the country. But too often, small businesses have been robbed of their voice. Their stories and the values they hold have been misrepresented and misunderstood. That has to change if we're to come out of this crisis and build an economy that's more equitable and resilient than what came before. That's why today's event is centered on small business owners, what they're confronting today, and their view on government's role in rebuilding the economy. Our panelists will talk about failures of the past and opportunities for the future. We'll talk about longstanding discrimination in lending and capital access, particularly for Black and brown-owned businesses. We'll explore the importance of regulation and oversight to protect small businesses and the people who own them. And we'll wrap up with a roundtable discussion with small business owners from across the country who'll talk about what they need to thrive. I look forward to hearing their stories and their insights. And to kick us off, it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Erika Beras. Erika is a reporter for Marketplace Business News. She spent much of her career focused on how our economy contributes to inequality. Before joining Marketplace, she was a contributor to NPR, BBC, National Geographic, New Yorker, among others. So Erika, thanks for joining us and leading today's discussion. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for that introduction. And thank you for those thoughts. We're going to talk a little bit about what our economy in crisis looks like right now, and what the role of government may be. We're going to introduce here Amanda Ballantyne. She's the Executive Director of Main Street Alliance, and Jade Magnus Ogunnaike. She's the Senior Campaign Director at Color of Change. And thank you both for joining us. And I think we'll start off by just talking a little bit about how is it exactly that we got here? You know, we know that the pandemic exacerbated a lot of the inequalities that we have in our culture and our society in this country, but tell us a little bit about how did we have this crisis and how did it become so acute and in terms of affecting small businesses?
Jade, do you want to get started or should I?
Yeah, I was like, okay, we're doing the little dance. I'll go ahead, Amanda. We know that COVID exacerbated issues that have already existed within our small business sector, particularly for Black and Latinx communities. The disparities that happen between small businesses are caused by persistent inequities in our economic system, particularly wealth and access to capital. From redlining to banks' refusal to provide loans, Black people in this country have been locked out of entrepreneurship historically, with super devastating effects for our communities. And when the COVID-19 pandemic came, it just, totally decimated small businesses across the country. At Color of Change, we did a poll with Main Street Alliance early on in the pandemic, around March, and we found that a little bit less than half, around 46% of Black businesses, said that they would not survive the coronavirus pandemic. They wouldn't make it even 6 months. And it emphasizes what we already know, that all small businesses, and particularly Black small businesses, they need relief, and they need it right now. We are entering the second sort of, wave of lockdowns. I live in New York. Things have been pretty much locked down since around March. But, I'm from Los Angeles, and my mother and my family are preparing to not be able to leave the house. They cannot eat even outdoors in a restaurant. And small businesses do not have the relief they need to be able to survive this lockdown, this pandemic. And we also know that, small businesses are the engines to our communities. As a young Black girl growing up in South LA, I went to, a local grocery store 2 blocks away from my house that was owned by a Latinx family. It was extremely small, couldn't fit more than 10 people in there, but that's where we went to get vegetables, fresh vegetables, because sometimes the supermarkets, due to food deserts, didn't have the best produce or meat. My dad got his hair cut at a barbershop owned by, a Black man. And so we know that when Black businesses suffer, Black communities suffer. And we're seeing that by every metric, Black small businesses and Black small business owners, unfortunately, are disproportionately impacted by barriers in our economic system. And that's only shown even clearer with the COVID-19 pandemic.
Amanda?
Yeah, I want to echo everything that Jade said. I think there have been long-standing, persistent inequities in access to credit and capital for really all small businesses. When we talk about small businesses, we're talking about real small businesses, independent businesses you see in your community. Those inequities are particularly true in Black and Brown communities, and for women business owners across the board. So when COVID happened, you had this sort of perfect storm of already persistent trouble in access to credit and capital, and businesses operating on thin margins without a safety net. Then all of a sudden there was consumer fear. There were public policy shutdowns for safety, which we supported, by the way. But they actually had the impact of closing down businesses all at once and stopping revenue. The federal programs that were created to kind of support small businesses, they rolled out late. They rolled out in a way that actually exacerbated inequities because they went through the private lending system instead of doing a public distribution to small businesses. And then ultimately the rules on them were so unclear that 50% of women and 50% of Black business owners reported believing that they were not even eligible to receive, for example, the PPP loan. So the way the programs rolled out was inequitable and really privileged bigger businesses, like we saw in the recent PPP data that was released. So, in addition to this global pandemic that impacted the whole world, the US federal response, which is important because states don't really have enough revenue to manage an economic crisis like this. The federal response was poorly designed, and it was designed in a way that showed that government was out of touch with the needs of very small business owners, and particularly Black and Brown small business owners. And that has continued as, really, I think the leadership in the Senate has played politics rather than fixing these programs and getting money into the hands of business owners who've been waiting for more relief since August.
Let me ask you, that's really interesting. And I think in terms of, the way that these programs rolled out, can you talk a little bit more about what was it about the way these were rolled out? Where did they go wrong? What was it? What kind of outreach could have been done? And what could be done even now? We're 10 months into this now.
I'll hop in and just say, you can look at some European countries that instead used a public system that was designed to keep businesses and their employees intact. They provided subsidies to businesses to maintain employees on payroll. Those were public systems, and they weren't rolled out through private lending systems. Early on in the pandemic, we knew that the banks, because of the way the rules rolled out, they were creating their own rules and they were privileging their own customers. If you know anything about access to credit and capital and racial disparities, you know that the vast majority of Black and Brown small businesses in this country do not have like traditional banking relationships for their businesses. They were left out, they were excluded by the policy, and that was done intentionally. I mean, the policy was designed the way it was to support these bigger businesses, and banks were given a lot of leeway in deciding who to lend to, and they lent to their existing customers. And so because of that, you see a gross disparity, I think, in who is going to be able to survive the pandemic. What needs to happen now immediately is grants moving out to small business owners around the country who've been really waiting for relief since August. Those could either roll through the Treasury or they could roll out through state and local governments, but it needs to be included in the relief package. We can't just, put more money into the PPP without solving its problems.
Jade?
Yeah, definitely. One thing that Amanda said that's really standing out to me is that essentially Congress's current, small business relief program, it assumed that all business owners had equal access to the resources and had equal access to credit and to banking services. One of the most interesting things about the way that, the PPP program rolled out is that there's there was all this outrage about Shake Shack and Ruth's Chris and Harvard and Yeezy getting all this PPP money. When the truth of the matter is, they have staff, they have attorneys who had their finger right on the button, who can press it immediately to get those funds first off. They also have relationships with people in government to ensure that those things happen. We found out, I think a couple of weeks ago, that Donald Trump and Jared Kushner, both, they received almost $4 million in PPP funds for their real estate, for some of their real estate companies. And so what we're seeing is that small businesses, particularly Black businesses, they don't have staff that are set up to sort of access those resources right away. The other thing we found in our poll is that there were just so many barriers to insufficient support for Black-owned businesses. Black small business owners had to wait much longer to hear back about their application. They were much less likely to even get the assistance they needed. 33% of Black businesses that we polled got a response within 2 weeks, where 15% of brown businesses and 44% of white, recipients heard back within 2 weeks. And only 37% of Black small business owners even received the amount of assistance that they requested. And so, there's this sort of pervasive feeling for Black small business owners who are already at a deficit because of issues of discrimination and bias, that sort of the card just stacked against them, and the government proves that is actually true. Black small business owners and small business owners nationwide were not set up to succeed in this environment during a pandemic that none of us have ever seen in our lifetime, a true public health crisis, which has then turned into an economic crisis. It's a crisis of our economy. The government did not seek to help small business owners. A lot of what we saw was cronyism. We saw $1 million businesses, one of the most striking things for me is Kanye West came out on the cover of Forbes this year as a billionaire. And yet we find out that he received $1 million in relief from the federal government. Something's just not adding up. And, the cronyism in the federal government and the lack of access and simple access for small business owners, it really left our folks at a deficit.
So the thing that I'm hearing from both of you is, this is something that is entrenched in the way the banking system is set up and the way that a lot of these systems are set up. And yet we've seen this sort of put to the highest test. What is the opportunity of this moment now then? I mean, now we've seen this and we've been able to maybe say for years, hey, this is how the system works. This is the ultimate test. And we saw how it played out. So what can we do going forward?
I think the opportunity of this moment really is to rethink the way entrepreneurism happens in this country and the role of the federal government particularly, but also state governments in creating a public policy environment where everybody has real access to good, transparent capital and credit to start their businesses. Right now, the way it works is that you have personal wealth in your personal network, and that can allow you to get and grow a business, because banks really aren't going to lend to you as a business until you are much larger, maybe 30 to 50 employees, depending on your industry. What we need is for SBA to be overhauled, for the Minority Business Development Corporation to be overhauled, and really develop entrepreneurship programs that are targeting underbanked communities with low risk, small loans to get their businesses started. And then we need to think about how to support those businesses through economic downturns and create more on-ramps to entrepreneurism so that everybody can start and grow a business in this economy, not just people who have wealth in their personal networks to get their startup going.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we're thinking a lot about at Color of Change is that, in the incoming Biden-Harris administration, what are all of the ways that we can revamp and invest in the Minority Business Development Agency? It doesn't require legislation. All it requires really is a commitment from the administration. What would it look like if Black business owners received grants instead of loans? What would it look like if we had, a federally funded business center initiative inside HBCUs and minority serving institutions that would really issue large scale grants and investments comparable to what venture capital really invests in the private sector. I think another big piece of this, something that we're thinking a lot about Color of Change is, the sort of the monopoly discussion. We really need a federal government and attorney general who's committed to putting big business monopolies like Amazon and Walmart under increased scrutiny. These monopolies really harm our small businesses. I live in Harlem, and 2 blocks away there's a Whole Foods, and there's a independently owned, Latino-owned small grocery store inside of my building. I often end up having to go to Whole Foods though, because they've lowered the prices for groceries so much that all of the local grocery stores in my neighborhood seem like it's almost 2 times what we're paying at Whole Foods. So we really have to have, there are a lot of opportunities for our federal government to really invest in small businesses and Black small businesses in particular.
And I have a question here from Andrew, O'Neill from Indivisible. How would granting national corporate immunity for COVID-19 related lawsuits impact small businesses that are already being squeezed by the Amazons and Walmarts of the world during the pandemic? And second part of the question, would there be specific impacts for Black and brown small businesses?
Honestly, I think the corporate immunity conversation is a red herring. The ability to actually prove a causal chain of where someone got COVID would be really, really difficult. And so in some ways, our business owners are really nervous about their ability to maintain operations. But what they've asked for is funding to support personal protective equipment, to retrofit their businesses for safety, sneeze guards, hand washing sinks, HVAC systems. They've asked for things like paid leave. They've asked for a set of things that they need to be able to function through this period of time. And corporate immunity isn't part of it. That's like a long-term interest of the tort reform movement, and they're wedging it in, and they're really holding us hostage around something that should be, anybody who knows the way tort lawsuits work, there's not some big massive wave of lawsuits coming at small business owners, right? It's more about needing customers to shop in their stores or needing support to get through periods when their businesses are closed.
Yeah, and I just want to tag a little bit on there, and that, this is just another redirection from, government representatives like Mitch McConnell, who have they're deeply invested in corporations and corporate health versus the health of our small businesses and our entrepreneurs. And it's just something, to sort of get us away from the actual issue, which is that the government, no matter the administration, needs to issue relief to small businesses.
And this is a question for both of you. Can you discuss how SBA Size Standards impacted the availability of PPP EIDL funds to the actual small businesses across the country? Should SBA revisit their size standards to better define what a true small business is? And if so, how? And that's from Alex Palmer Sullivan.
I can take a first crack at that. I think that the problem, first of all, the question about SBA, business size is a very important question, because what Jade and I have been talking about here is how very, very small businesses have been left out. The vast majority of Black and Latinx businesses in this country are micro businesses, sole proprietorships and businesses of like 2 to 3 employees. Leaving out those businesses from access to the PPP program for the first week of the program meant that in the first round, all the money was gone before those businesses really had an opportunity to apply for it. In the broader sense, I think when we talk about business size standards and the SBA and the DOL, what we have is a situation where most of our public policy is geared towards much larger businesses that people wouldn't tend to think of as small businesses. A business with 500 employees is actually what most people would consider a pretty large business. So what we're talking about is the need to develop programming that's specifically for micro businesses in a broad number of sectors, to help them access, startup grants and capital that's safe. Right now, those businesses really can only get startup capital through, they're leveraging credit cards, personal assets, and it's just not a way to foster a vibrant, diverse small business sector.
Yeah, absolutely. In our findings, we have found that, nearly all currently Color of Change is even creating like a Black Business Green Book to sort of amplify our small business work and our entrepreneurship work, to really highlight Black-owned businesses. And, by and large, the businesses are sole proprietorships, or as Amanda said, have maybe 2 to 3 employees. One might be a relative. These small businesses and micro businesses are bootstrapping it, and they're doing everything that they can to survive the current moment. In this time during unprecedented civil unrest, unprecedented government ineptitude, and a public health crisis, it's more important than ever that, all of the standards for SBA administration are casting a wide net to include as many people as possible.
All right, thank you both so much. We're going to move on to our next section here. We're going to talk a little bit about capital access gaps, Black businesses, and wealth creation. And in this, we're going to see a video from Nneka Brown. She's the founder and owner of Innovative Supplies Worldwide, a school supplies designer in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And we're going to hear her story now. Hey, Nneka, would you like to share your story with us and tell us a little bit about how you accessed capital access and what the impact of COVID has been on your business?
Yes, so how I was able to access capital was through the Tulsa Remote program, where they're looking for members in the United States to move to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and work remotely. And I applied for it in 2019 into the fall, before COVID really became as big as it became. And when they emailed me and said, we want you to come to Oklahoma and check out Tulsa, I knew that it was going to be a great access point for me to finally get some capital, because I didn't get it through the PPP or the EIDL. I was denied for both of those. And so I knew that this would be an opportunity for me to go ahead and get something rather than nothing.
And I'm familiar with that program. What was the, in terms of accessing capital, can you tell us a little bit about your background before you moved to Tulsa, where you were, what your business looked like, and what opportunities moving there opened up for you? Was it just being in a new place? Was it where you were? Was it what you were able to accomplish or do in Tulsa?
Yeah, so before I moved to Tulsa, I was in Columbus, Georgia. It's a military-friendly town near Fort Benning, Georgia. And so that's where I decided to move to when I left the military, from sustaining multiple traumatic brain injuries that I got jumping out of airplanes for the 82nd Airborne Division. And so when I left the military and created my company, again, I decided to move home to Columbus, Georgia, and start my manufacturing headquarters for my company. And I just wasn't finding the resources in my town there. The only Black-owned bank that was in my town had shut down its branch, which had me to move all the way to Atlanta to establish a banking relationship. So I decided to find a bank in Columbus, Georgia to, apply for the PPP loan. And again, I didn't get it because right when I applied with them, they said they were not taking any new applications. So when the Tulsa Remote program, reached out and said, we want to move you to Tulsa, and I got that access to capital immediately. Once getting here to Tulsa, I was able to establish better relationships and start to grow my business from the ground up.
And that was in 2019. How have you been impacted by the pandemic?
I've been impacted by the pandemic with children, a lot of students having to work predominantly remotely and online. So parents are not going into stores, they're not buying school supplies as much. Children aren't turning in as much paperwork assignments. So it's really, decreased the amount of paper products that I'm manufacturing at this point in time, which has caused me to pivot my business into producing educational video content for parents to stream for their children as a way and a means to keep income coming in for my small business and keep me funded as a solo entrepreneur currently.
And has that been comparable to the manufacturing you were doing before?
It has. It's really shown me that I can pivot, but it's also given me this understanding that the government can play a role in helping American manufacturers at this point in time. And I really think that they should really consider that, because we're having to look at our supply chains more seriously in America right now, and having to rely heavily on American-made products at this current time. And so for us not to expand that PPP across the different manufacturing industries in America is also going to be something we should start heavily considering and taking a look at.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you for sharing that. And we're going to have you in conversation with Andre Perry. He's a fellow at the Metropolitan Policy Program at Brookings. He's a scholar in residence at American University and the author of the new book, Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities. Thank you so much for being here. And I have a question for you. Are some of the obstacles that Nneka just shared in her story familiar to you from what you've seen in your research?
Oh, absolutely. I generally start off with a quote that I reference, and there's nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can't solve. That many of the barriers that that Black business owners face are structural in nature. We talk a lot about business loans and business capital, but let's be clear, most people start their businesses using the equity in their home or individual wealth. And that's been denied to Black people historically through redlining, through racial housing covenants, through discriminatory lending practices and banking. And so from the get-go, before someone even starts to consider starting a business, we have less resources to do so. And so the stories that we are hearing throughout this program it's not just about business. It's about the devaluation of Black people in Black communities, and it certainly impacts business owners.
And in terms of the economic crisis, one of the things we heard earlier, and one of the things we've seen throughout this crisis, is the crisis has exacerbated everything that, all of the disparities that exist in the country. Why has this been so particularly damaging to Black and brown small businesses? What is different?
Well, I would say, what's the same is that COVID does not discriminate, but our past policies in housing, business, and transportation and other sectors have. Look, what the disproportionate amount of death, the PPP loan fiasco, all of these are signs of structural differences between Black Americans and others in this country. The PPP loan was structurally problematic for Black people because it certainly exacerbated the lack of relationships Blacks had with banks, but it also structurally did not work with sole proprietorships as well. So 95% of Black businesses are sole proprietorships compared to 78% of white businesses. And so when when PPP loans were rolled out, most Black businesses structurally did not receive it. And that's a metaphor for how government has treated Black people in the past. Is that no one has to lift a finger, no one has to hold up whites only signs for us to have an exclusionary result. And so it's structure, it's nothing new, it's just exacerbated by the current crisis.
And one of the things, we've seen in the last few months is we're calling it the awakening that we've had about racial injustice in this country. Do you see anything changing with the way banking is is happening, and the way businesses are funded or the way they're supported?
There are a few times where you start to see the kind of outlays that will truly build capacity for Black institutions and financial institutions in particular. This is one of them. We're seeing trillions being rolled out, but what ended up happening is those trillions went to mainstream banks, while financial institutions that are have great relationship with Black communities did not see that kind of infusion. Of the $2+ trillion spending package, only about 10 million went to the Minority Business Development Agency, which is charged for supporting Black, Brown, and Asian businesses. They only got, less than a fraction of a percent to support those firms. And I just also want to point out, we need to invest in both neighborhood serving businesses, because most businesses in Black and Brown communities are serving their local residents. So we need to do that, but we also need to make investments in high growth firms. So just the highest grossing industry is in the utilities. There's only 18 Black businesses in utilities. And that's because it takes an enormous amount of capital to start up. You just can't use the equity in your home, your family and friends' dollars. You need major investment. So government has a role, and it enabled many white people to start businesses in the utilities, but it did not enable Black businesses and Brown businesses to do so. So we really need to have targeted investments in both neighborhood serving industries and sectors, but also we need investments in high growth areas, so those revenues and employment can spill over into Black and Brown communities.
And going forward, Nneka, I'm interested in hearing from you, in terms of, you said you talked a little bit about getting help when you first moved to Tulsa and not really being able to get much help once the pandemic started. Where do you see yourself where do you see your business going from here?
I see myself still continuing to raise more capital as much as possible, because again, I do want to grow my manufacturing space. And so I don't, I can't say I need $5,000 to do that. I know I need more than 5,000. And so what I'm going to need to do is just keep continuing to raise that capital as much as possible. And that's going to require me applying for loans, grants. Is anything that comes my way, I'm applying for it, just like I did for the Tulsa remote program, and it opened up for me.
And Erika, I just want to point this out, because Nneka is absolutely right in the sense of if she's getting into manufacturing, which we have an underrepresentation in, it's going to need capital. You're just not going to string together family and friends. That's not going to happen. And so it is the government's role. If the government is supposed to serve the people, then it should come out in the wash in who it invests in. And it's not doing that. So you have Nneka served her country, doing everything she's asked to do, and she can't get the level of investment as her white colleagues are getting. And so there's just a basic inequity there. I work in a think tank. We're always throwing out fancy data, and I certainly want to do that. But I just want to be clear. There is plain discrimination that is occurring when someone like Nneka can't get the resources. I mean, that is problematic. And so we've got to demand, we've got to stay in these streets. By the way, many of the advancements we're seeing and adjustments to PPP loan is a result because people are hitting these streets and they're saying no. And so for Nneka to achieve, we got to do our part and raise hell, quite frankly, because many people just don't see the benefits to the economy overall. And do you mind if I just give you a few stats? I told you I wouldn't run off some stats, but if of the 2.2 employer businesses, meaning businesses with more than one employee, actually went to 14%, which is our population. it would be more than 800,000 more Black businesses. Currently, the Black businesses bring on average about 1 million a year compared to 6 million, more 6.5 million of their white counterparts. If there was parity in that, there would be increase in total Black revenues by more than $600 billion. I mean, this helps the economy, it helps the individual business owner, but it helps the economy. So we got to get it right that this, when we deny Nneka, we deny the entire economy.
And let me ask you, actually, let's go to Nneka here and ask her just quickly about the workforce that she employs, because you're not just a small business owner and employing yourself. There are others that work alongside you and with you. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. One of the biggest things that I knew I needed to do when I left the military was continue the leadership skills and traits that had been instilled into me. I didn't want to let, the military's time and training just go to waste. So I knew when I left the military, I'd still want to be a leader. And so what I decided to do when I opened up my company was hire what is typically considered an at-risk teenager. They've been given that label in society. And I wanted to bring them underneath my wing and teach them about manufacturing, about product development, about email marketing, about social media. So that way they're earning these soft and hardworking skills to put onto a resume before they even leave high school. Because I don't believe in just dropping fries and grease and calling that a job. There's more jobs that teenagers can have that are really impactful and that can show them what entrepreneurship looks like on the outside of high school.
And in terms of keeping all of your employees employed, while the pandemic's been going on, can you talk a little bit about how that has worked and how you've been able to pay them and sort of the logistics and the ins and outs of that?
Definitely. So going forward, what I want to start doing is paying them as 1099 contractors. So that way they're able to work from home in a safe environment while COVID is still happening. I don't want to have them at risk or expose them unnecessarily. And so that's what I'm thinking of doing going forward for my employees. But what I want to do long term, again, is open up my manufacturing facility and large scale, really mass produce these notebooks and still have them involved in the order fulfillment and packaging services.
And Andre, you mentioned some of the opportunities, and improvements that could be made to some of these programs. Can you talk a little bit more about what other ways these programs can be improved? It took many years to get to where we are. How would we be able to turn this around in a shorter period of time? Took centuries to get to the pandemic and the way our system is set up. So how do we turn this around?
Well, we need to establish some business goals, meaning we need to say how many small businesses we need to make into medium-sized businesses. We need to understand how many medium-sized businesses we need to make into small firms. We also need concrete goals on individual family wealth. Again, most people start their businesses around with the equity in their home. So we need goals to increase home ownership so that folks don't necessarily have to take out a loan. Remember, only 1% of entrepreneurs start their firms using loan capital compared to 7% of their white counterparts. And again, I said this in Nneka, and I hope I'm not mispronouncing your name. Is it Nneka?
No, you're fine. You're good. Okay. You're good.
So the Black owned, we need to invest in high growth industries. Manufacturing is a critical one. And by the way, we also need to invest in the industries that we are highly populated in. We are very populated in healthcare and social assistance services, professional, scientific, and technical services, and administrative support and waste management. And so those are where our businesses are generally located. And so not only must we invest to build capacity in high growth areas, we also need to invest where there's what suggests to be a good ecosystem. And so in particularly healthcare, in a moment when health is everything, we should be investing mightily in contact tracing, in tech firms who are working in the healthcare sector. This is where we need to build capacity. And so when we're talking about a revamping of the Small Business Administration, the Minority Business Development Agency, Department of Labor, things like that, we need concrete goals to rectify the harms that have been done to Black and brown people, and direct, so that we can direct capital to those people and communities, so that the entire economy can benefit.
All right, thank you both so much for your time and for your thoughts. This was wonderful. We're going to move on to our next section. We're going to talk a little bit about financial regulation and oversight, coming out of what you just said, Andre. That seems as if it seems like a logical transition here. And we're going to hear from Rashonda Young, and I believe we have a video from her.
Hello, my name is Rashonda Young, and I'm a small business owner here in Waterloo, Iowa. I'm the founder of Popcorn Heaven, which is a gourmet popcorn chain of stores that I began back in 2013 and licensed in 7 states before I sold the business in 2019. I'm also the co-founder of a community development financial institution, which is called the Bank of Jabez, which is being launched here in Waterloo, Iowa. And I've been a landlord for the past 20 years now. So during my 20 years as a business owner, I've both witnessed and experienced lending discrimination for the licensees that I had with Popcorn Heaven and for myself as I've tried to fund and scale my various businesses. After being denied a 90-day, $5,000 loan for my then 19-year-old real estate business just last year in 2019, and being told by the banker who denied me that they didn't want my business at their bank and I needed to look at moving my accounts elsewhere, I decided that pursuing a PPP loan was not worth my time. I did, however, try to help other small business owners in my network apply for the PPP by going through the application with them and helping them get their businesses set up on accounting software. Many of these business owners did not have strong banking relationships with any 7A lending institutions, so I saw denial after denial after denial. And the majority of the businesses that I was working with were minority-owned businesses. One of the business owners did end up receiving a very paltry $6,000, even though she owned 2 businesses that had both been shut down for months as a result of the pandemic. You know, it's not exactly clear how this discrepancy happened, but I've heard stories like this from minority businesses all over the country. You know, it's clear that not having a strong banking relationship or strong accounting software or a CPA on the team, which is the story of many small and micro businesses, was a major barrier to the PPP program. Our private lending system and lack of government oversight presented many challenges for small business owners, particularly for minority-owned businesses, even before the pandemic began. Continued reliance on private banks only solidifies racial wealth inequality and widens the ever-expanding wealth gap. There's urgent need for direct support that is not loan-based, and there's a need for longer-term reimagining of what role government can play in fostering small businesses to start and grow. You know, we're not asking a lot at all. You know, we're just asking for improvements that can be made, and there's significant improvements that can be made for women and minority-owned businesses in this country if the government were empowered to function the way that it was designed to function. For example, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or CFPB, could simply properly implement Section 1071 of Dodd-Frank. Instead, there is a complete lack of data, which makes it impossible to try to convince potential lenders or government agencies that our market is not only underserved, but being discriminated against as well. If we could at least ensure proper oversight and data collection practices by government agencies, perhaps, just maybe, we would see that viable investment opportunities and the real potential of our small business economy are being fundamentally ignored. These slight improvements would also leave us better prepared when our government needs to intervene to mitigate economic devastation in the wake of a global pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we're going to hear now from Bharat Ramamurti, a member of the COVID-19 Congressional Oversight Commission and Managing Director of the Corporate Power Program at the Roosevelt Institute. Welcome. And from Ryan Dennis, the Legislative and Advocacy Director at Americans for Financial Reform. Thank you both for joining us. We just heard from Rashonda Story some of the real world impacts of how financial regulation can impact small business owners. Can you talk a little bit about how financial regulation does impact them, in terms of sort of, I think, some of the bigger issues that we're seeing here?
Sure. Thank you for having me, and good to be here with all of you. I think that two big issues come to mind, right? First, we just had this crisis, and there was a concerted effort to help small businesses through the PPP. But what we saw was, even in this program that was intended to help small businesses, basic lack of understanding of the issues facing a lot of small businesses around the country. So, for example, the PPP worked through the banking system, right? Business owners had to go find a financial institution that would provide them with the PPP loan to keep their business going. And frankly, a lot of small business owners don't have a pre-existing banking relationship. And so structuring the PPP that way, instead of using alternative approaches like using a private payroll processing company or something like that to get money to small business owners, that systematically excluded a lot of business owners, particularly owners of very small businesses, and disproportionately Black and Hispanic business owners, who are more likely than white business owners not to have a pre-existing banking relationship. So those kinds of seemingly technical decisions can have huge impacts in terms of access to these government programs. It's an issue that we see most notably in the PPP, but across a wide variety of programs intended to help small businesses. The second issue is just generally on regulation, right? How do we design regulations so that they treat small businesses fairly? And what I've found in my time on the Oversight Commission and working on Capitol Hill is that complexity is the enemy, right? Oftentimes what happens is that Congress will say, write a rule about this or that thing, and then it will go to a federal agency to actually do the work of writing the rule. And in that process, big companies can throw tons of lawyers and lobbyists at the agency to create carve-outs and exemptions and grandfather clauses and other things in the rules that give them a special advantage. And small business owners simply don't have those kinds of resources. And so at the end of the day, each one of these rules, more often than not, can tilt the playing field a little bit further and a little bit further against small business owners who are trying to compete against bigger businesses. So, that's not to say that regulation isn't important. It is, of course, when it comes to public health and safety and so on, and financial soundness. But I think it's incumbent on Congress to do more of that work and to be more responsive to the needs of small businesses, rather than letting agencies do it where they're more likely to be captured by the bigger companies with more lobbyists.
Ryan?
Yes. So we at Americans for Financial Reform, we are somewhat the tip of the spear of the progressive movement in fighting for a lot of these financial regulations. And the interesting part about this whole conversation is the programs are working the way they were designed. Before these programs were enacted into law, we vigorously made all of these arguments that if you use the banks, it will lock out, millions of very small businesses, businesses of color, women-owned businesses, and they passed the law as with all of these loopholes and lack of transparency and lack of reporting requirements. And so as we see the kind of wreckage of those decisions, it's hard to think about how we need to reform these things because they were kind of designed to fail from the beginning. They were designed to, send a lot of this money to companies that really shouldn't have needed the money in the first place. A lot of companies who have used financialization or other things to really push the envelope and risk that a lot of small businesses don't have the ability to do. And so I think looking at a lot of these programs, I think Bharat is exactly right that we really need to put the pressure on Congress to do the job that they were sent there to do. That a lot of times they pass these bills and they like to take the fanfare from it and say that they did the good work. But when you see how things are implemented, they are implemented in such a way that it will redistribute wealth upward to those who are already wealthy. And so that's really the difficulty. And that's why we need so many voices of small business owners to counteract the prevailing narrative about regulation being a problem when we know that big business uses regulation for their benefit. And so that's why, we're see the work of Main Street Alliance so valuable for pushing and making sure that small business owners do have the resources they need to move forward.
So that's really interesting. And I was going to ask, what the government can do to be more accountable, and transparent, and what kind of data is needed. But it sounds as if the data is out there. I know, we've all seen a lot of this data. So what else can be done, or what new kind of data should be collected or can be collected?
Well, I think definitely 1071 Dodd-Frank needs to be implemented, and hopefully we will have new leadership at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that is interested. They have set up, they do have a timeline for implementing it, but it will take over, I think, 2.5 years with the timeline that they have set forth with right now. And it's already been, Dodd-Frank was passed in like 2010. And so it's already been 10 years and they still want to have 2 more years to work on it. And so we just see a complete abdication by this outgoing administration to really to put in policies that will help small businesses. We have just seen 4 years of the administration being captured by big business, tilting the playing field towards their cronies. And so we're just, really hopeful that things can change with this new administration coming in, but it is going to take us raising our voice and keeping their feet to the fire to make sure that we do have these things implemented. Because every day I lobby, and Bharat can tell you, it's myself as the lobbyist on the side of small businesses and investors and consumers, and there's about 20 lobbyists for me on every issue. And so we are definitely outgunned. And so as many more people can come into the fight as possible, that's the way that we can see progress. Because one thing we say at AFR is we don't fight the financial system, we fight the political system. And because the political system has been so captured by big money that everyone knows what needs to be done, but because of the money in the system, you just cannot break through with things that will help regular people.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just will add, quick thing, which is that I mentioned some of the racial disparities when it came to access to the PPP. Actually, that isn't based on data that was collected by the government, right? There was not a requirement that banks collect information about, sort of demographic information about the people who are trying to get money through the PPP, right? And so we're left to kind of speculate as to what the disparate racial impact is, and rely on other sources of information for that. Similarly, the Main Street lending program, which was created by the Federal Reserve to help small businesses, the ones that are maybe a little bit larger, with several hundred employees, that too didn't collect demographic information about the individuals who are trying to get money through the program and so on. And so and in fact, our tax system also doesn't collect basic information, including racial information. I think that collecting that data will allow us to document and act on some of the disparities in the system more effectively. I used to work for Senator Elizabeth Warren. Her mantra was always, collect the data first, because you got to spotlight the problem. And once you can demonstrate to people that there's a problem, your chances of actually developing a solution are higher. I think that kind of basic data collection would really help design more effective programs going forward and more equitable programs.
Great, thank you. We have a question from Mayor Rosenberg of Wausau, Wisconsin, and we're going to hear from the mayor now.
Hey there, I'm Katie Rosenberg, Mayor of Wausau, Wisconsin. The COVID-19 pandemic is lasting a lot longer than we optimists ever anticipated. While the CARES funding has helped, we've already used up all of our federal funding here in Wausau. I'm nervous about what 2021 and especially 2022 will bring when it comes to our budget. We squeaked by this year. Unfortunately, our small businesses continue to suffer in this environment. We risk losing everything that makes us who we are and the viability of our local economy. We need help finding solutions to this crisis. What can local government officials like me do to urge Congress to act?
Well, I'll jump in, particularly for municipalities and counties. I think if you all can band together and work, there was a Main Street lending facility, or not Main Street, sorry, municipal lending facility that was set up to give out loans, low interest loans to cities and counties and states to deal with it. Of course, the criteria for it were very onerous, so pretty much only states and the largest cities and counties were eligible, but the Federal Reserve could change its requirements unilaterally. And so we at AFR have been urging them to lower the requirements, but as much as in your state you can get other municipalities, other county leaders, other state leaders to reach out to the Federal Reserve and your members of Congress and tell them that they need to, one, bring back the municipal lending facility in the Biden administration, since the Trump administration is winding it down, but the Federal Reserve can start it again using their 13.3 powers to move forward, and they need to extend the time period, lower some of the requirements, but that is, we feel, the best way that is available outside of a new stimulus or relief package passed by Congress that appropriates new money to help localities and counties make it through this troubling time, because we know a lot of the budget states and a lot of local governments' budgets were at the tail end when the pandemic started, and so it's a lot of questions about this coming year's budget for a lot of localities, and so we really do need that facility back up and running, and with much more generous terms for those to apply, because only, I think, 3 entities use the program. I think it was like the New York subway system, Illinois, and one other state, and they didn't even use 10% of the actual appropriation that Congress gave to the program, and they could basically multiply the appropriation out into trillions of dollars from the billions that were, but none of that was actually used. And so that money was appropriated by Congress and should be there to help states and localities.
Yep, I just think, I totally agree with that. And of course, I think, loans are good and a good backup, but of course, nothing substitutes for direct support from Congress. I think Democrats in Congress right now are fighting for, hundreds of billions of dollars in direct aid to state and local governments. Republicans in the Senate are opposing that to the extent that you can weigh in with your members of Congress, including the Republican ones, to talk about the importance of keeping these budgets whole, avoiding some of the layoffs and service cuts that are, sadly probably required at this point without additional support. I think that would be helpful.
All right. Thank you both so much for your thoughts and for joining us today. We're going to move on to our next section. We're going to talk a little bit about long-term small business needs and what actually helps support entrepreneurs. And we have a host of folks that are going to be joining us. We have Natasha Crosby, a licensed realtor in the Commonwealth of Virginia, a small business owner and president of the Richmond LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce. We have Anna, Tsantir, founder and creator of Two Bettys Green Cleaning in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Mike Simmons, Fluent Business Solutions, a small business that does QuickBooks consulting and internal accounting for other small businesses in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Christina Hudson, founder and owner of Simply Irresistible Beauty, a beauty and hair care business that specializes in hair pieces for men and women who have experienced hair loss, alopecia, and other conditions in Georgetown, Kentucky. And we're welcoming back Nneka Brown, founder and owner of Innovative Supplies Worldwide, a school supplies designer in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Thank you all for coming back and coming on. Now we've talked a little bit about capital access, particularly to help businesses weather the crisis. Tell us, each of you, if you want to start off, we can start with you, Anna. What else do small businesses need to thrive?
Currently, we definitely need another infusion of the FFCRA money, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, so that we can continue to pay our hourly staff to stay home if they have symptoms and if they need to be on quarantine. The PPP is also something that I think a better version that's more equitably distributed, but and a few kinks fixed. Those two things really were what I would call the only paid leave program the United States has seen. So those two things did work. They need another version to fix the problems that were indicative of both of them.
Natasha?
I believe a strong paid leave program will benefit us moving forward. Small businesses like mine, we want to compete, able to provide our employees with the same benefits that larger companies are able to do, and that is just not available to us through the private system. It's just too costly. So a state-run plan would be a great benefit to smaller businesses, so that we can provide those benefits that our employees need and deserve, the same way these larger companies can provide benefits to their employees.
Michael?
Yeah, I would echo what both of them said. Those things are absolutely important. We feel that in our own business and also in our client base. We too struggle with affordable access to health insurance, which is really important and often, I wouldn't say overlooked, but in a micro business like our own, it's vitally important that we have affordable healthcare options for ourselves, but also for our employees, to be competitive in hiring and to compete. Our employees are professional level employees. They get paid a very livable wage salary, and yet it's really difficult to lure them away from a larger firm that can provide the type of benefits that they can through group policies. The whittling away of the Affordable Care Act from from someone who purchases it on the individual marketplace is really threatening to our business.
Nneka?
I'd like to see from the states and the government some sort of subsidy voucher for entrepreneurs that are also single parents, for the entrepreneurs that are out there that have children and are doing a small business solely by themselves, and then having kids on top of that, and them not being in school. There needed to be some sort of a backup plan for those entrepreneurs, and I didn't see anything like that was talked about in the PPP. So that's something I'd see for the government going forward.
And that's something that I think everyone has struggled with throughout this pandemic, is caring for loved ones, whether they be children or parents or anyone else. Can each of you actually take some time and tell us a little bit about your personal stories in caring for loved ones, if you have during this pandemic, how you have done so, if things were exacerbated because of the pandemic, or if these are struggles just like a lot of the other struggles we've heard that are kind of baked into our society?
Yeah, definitely. So in June of 2019, I was faced with repossession of my vehicle because I had to keep making payments on my office. And again, I was bootstrapping, so the profits just weren't there enough to cover my vehicle and my office. So I made that hard decision to lose my vehicle. And then in the midst of COVID happening, sales took even more of a plummet. But again, the Tulsa remote opportunity opened up and I was able to move to Tulsa. But it's just not very pedestrian friendly city, and the bus system is just not great yet. And so when me and my daughter moved to Tulsa, I had to make the hard decision to then ask her father in Virginia to step up to the plate for me and help out. And he willingly did so that I can continue to grow my business here in Tulsa, and just try to do as best as an opportunity as I can here and then still provide for her while she's in Virginia. But had the state stepped up and offered something, I would have been still able to be with my daughter right now.
I can share a personal story. My mother, who's 83 years old, has Alzheimer's and is still living at home. Fortunately, my sister lives with her and is a primary caregiver, but it's really, even though she's close, only about 6 miles away from where I am, I feel in order to act responsibly, I can't be there nearly as much or in the way that I would normally be, and it's put a real strain on that. The other option is to have her in a care facility, which right now is not a great option either. So I'm not sure what the answer is to any of that. I can just tell you it's made it incredibly difficult.
And I as well know, the difficulties of being a small business owner while trying to care for a loved one. When I first moved back to Richmond, to Central Virginia, I did so because my sister needed care, and so I had to take on being a caregiver, a breadwinner, and having to do that without a paid leave policy in place was very difficult, and I think that people should not have to take on such a burden when there are options available, right? There are ways to get this done, and so I know the difficulty of having to juggle that, and I think that we as a society need to move forward to allow people to be able to do that with a little bit more grace and ease.
And there seems to be two sides to this, which is the side of having to support and not having the resources to support, but also what we're seeing happening to neighborhood-based childcare businesses, which again are many of them small businesses. And this is a question here from Jim Hauser. wanting to know that these were already marginally prosperous. They suffered mightily from the COVID shutdowns, and there's been a shift to work from home and employee furloughs. When COVID is brought under control and the U.S. workforce is asked to return, how can these businesses be supported to quickly access the same kind of resources you're talking about everyone needing to access?
What nobody needs, well, I shouldn't say what, nobody needs another loan on their books. I think there has to be aggressive grant funding for businesses like that who have to come back in order to allow people to re-enter the workforce as things change back to something a little more normal. And in order for them to open and be viable and allow people to go back to work, and especially as we keep hearing the impact on women being so much greater than men in this regard. And I just think that it's one thing to be able to get a guaranteed loan, but that sets you back years and can also impact other types of funding that you may need just on a normal business cycle or trajectory. And so I think some direct grant funding would be essential for them. And I think that they absolutely need to be brought back and made as whole as possible, and be able to care for our kids.
The impact, I want to just add the impact for people with children right now. We've all been asked to reinvent the way we do everything. Businesses have been, the ones that have survived, have had to reinvent the way they do business, have had to reinvent. People have had to reinvent the way they work. We've had to reinvent the way we do school and childcare. Myself, I am the mother of two who have both IEPs at school, so my kids receive special ed. That's a totally different added challenge to at-home learning. And also with a partner that's out of the house working to manage, we're basically 2 shifts passing, working into the night. So I finish up my nights at 11 p.m. about because of the shared, just with at-home schooling, etc. I also just want to add that I think, this is something that definitely could have been, if we had a paid leave program in place before this, and why we really need to ask the government to innovate just like we have all had to innovate. And those first shots that, the government had, they need to be looked at. The failures of them need to be fixed. And we really all needed another installment of that in the fall. But looking forward, we still need that. Paid leave is something that really levels the playing field, as Natasha said, across the board, not just for businesses, but between women and men, and also between racially, right? In Minnesota, we know paid leave is only given. Only 16% of Minnesotans have paid leave. Most of them are white, affluent men. I would argue to say those who need it least. So I think this also has to do with that childcare issue, or the time to care when needed. So I just wanted to add that this time during COVID has exacerbated something that, if we take what we have learned from this 2020 experience and move forward, it is time to reinvent some of the ways that we support people in the U.S., especially small business owners who are, many of us do bootstrap. Women and people of color have to, because we're 80% or, 98% less likely to get capital when we go need it. And the same happened this past year, as many of the speakers before us have pointed out.
Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us. Wonderful to hear your stories, and also very sobering at the same time. We're going to introduce our next speaker, Congressman Andy Kim of New Jersey. Congressman Kim serves on the House Small Business Committee and played a key role in improving the PPP. He'll share more about how we make it out of the economic downturn with a robust small business economy. Hello there.
Hi, how are you doing? Thanks for having me here.
Of course. Thank you for joining us. So tell us a little bit about what has been the role that you've played in improving the PPP?
Well, the work that I've tried to do on the Small Business Committee, as well as I'm on what's called the Select Committee on the Coronavirus Crisis. So through these two lenses here, really been trying to make sure that we are, first of all, ensuring that this is a program that is reaching the people that we need to. And some of the struggles that we had right out of the gate coming out is just access to this program. We've seen a number of problems especially when there was communities of color or immigrant-owned businesses that were struggling to have access because they don't have the same relationships with the banking sector, for instance. So we were able to make some changes to that, and we're trying to make additional changes to that as we engage in hopefully solidifying these negotiations for another round of the Paycheck Protection Program, as well as additional efforts that we're trying to do, as well as, listening to small businesses about the implementation of the PPP, whether that was about the forgivability of the loan and just trying to simplify that process. As the chairman of the subcommittee on economic growth, taxes, and access to capital in small business, we've been hearing about that and just trying to make sure that this isn't going to be a program that helps small businesses, not add more paperwork and red tape to the challenges that they're already facing, as well as issues like whether it was the 75-25 rule or about other aspects of the initial structure of the PPP that were adding a lot of inflexibility to the problems that we're facing. And what we know is that small businesses are not, one size fits all. They come in all different shapes and sizes and different types of industries. So those are some of the different ways that I've been trying to work to be able to address these problems. No perfect fix here, but we are trying to do our best to adapt it to the needs of small businesses, and we need to make sure that we continue this.
All right. And Congressman Kim, I'll let you have a few words with our virtual guests, and when you wrap up, I'll be back.
Okay, sounds good. Well, look, thank you everyone for joining on here, and I'm just so grateful for your time and your energy. I was able to listen into some of the discussion prior to me joining on, and I want to start by saying I hope you all are staying safe and healthy through these tough times. I know that there's a lot that we are going through, and a lot of people are really struggling. And it's incredibly important that the work that we do in Congress, in the administration, and other aspects of our life, that we are trying to meet this moment and meet the challenges that you are facing. First and foremost, it's about addressing the immediacy of people's pain and struggles, whether that's about health and the pandemic, whether that's about the economic recovery. And I'm just going to continue to keep working on these issues going forward for us to get back on our feet and move forward. And there's a work that I'm doing on the Select Committee on the Coronavirus Crisis, especially right now, the work that we're trying to do to move forward with the vaccine development and distribution. This is what's going to help us be able to plan on how we come out of this. What we see going through this, and I think the last panel was raising a lot of these issues, is we see in the struggles that are happening right now, the weaknesses in our system. The struggles that people are having, small businesses trying to understand how they're going to get back on their feet. I heard parents talking about how they're going to be able to handle the workload, especially with young kids at home. And I got a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. I got 2 baby boys that are just very cute, but extremely difficult to be able to manage through this time. And my wife and I, both working, are struggling to be able to make ends meet and be able to figure out how we can be able to push forward and keep them safe while also being able to do the work that we need to do. So, these are struggles that we need to make sure that we are getting a handle on, and, ones that we are trying to do better on. What we need to do is obviously make sure that small businesses can make their way through these difficult times, and you're getting the support that you need. And I know so much of today was about that. But again, I thought I heard on the last panel just some points that were really resonant with me in terms of how I'm trying to think about this, that our goal is not just to dial back the clock and turn back the clock to February 2020. This is an opportunity for us to try to think about how we build a more resilient environment and ecosystem for small businesses, for our workforce, and be able to move that forward, whether that's for parents, whether that's for entrepreneurs and innovators, whether that is for our mom and pop shops or about other aspects of this, this is a time where we need to be thinking about that and trying to have that strategy and that thoughtfulness of approach to move forward. And the way that we do that is by hearing your voices and drawing upon your experiences in terms of what we can do going forward. We know that we had a lot of problems and challenges facing small businesses and working families well before this pandemic. And we know that we will continue to have these problems going forward. There's a deep level of inequality in our nation that we need to confront. And we need to understand how it is that we can tackle that moving forward in a more comprehensive way. That's why I'm hoping to stay on the Small Business Committee, continue to raise these issues and try to have that follow through coming out from this pandemic, because we know, being honest with ourselves, it's going to be a long road to recovery ahead. And we hate to hear that, but we know it's the truth. And I want you to know that I will not lose our attention span on these issues that are facing our small businesses going forward. So I'm just grateful to have a chance to be able to talk with all of you. I hope that we can continue on, and please don't hesitate to reach out now to me and my office if there's other things that we can do going forward. So again, I wish you all the best. Please stay safe and healthy, and thank you for letting me take a few minutes here to say thank you and take care.
And thank you, Representative Kim, for your leadership on these issues. We've heard from small business owners from across the country and experts on policy and regulation. And it's clear that there's an opportunity for government to redefine its role in supporting our small businesses economy, from healthcare to capital access to paid leave and childcare, but also immediately and sustainably in terms of delivering capital and credit to small businesses that need it most. Thank you for spending the past 90 minutes with us. And please reach out to the Main Street Alliance with any questions you may have following today's event. Thank you.